But his call to action didn't produce his desired response. He was largely ignored. Many of the Everafters said they didn't want to get involved, even if they were shaken by the prince's dark predictions. By the end of the day, only 6 more refugees had volunteered to join Snow White's militia. Dinner was served in the courtyard as the sun sank below the tree line. Morgan Le Fay conjured enough tables and folding chairs for everyone. The magic tables came complete with plates, utensils, and drinking glasses. Mr. Seven lit torches so everyone could see. The refugees stood in a long line for their share of beans, brown bread, potatoes, and corn. Sabrina and her family, along with Red, dined together. Granny Rhoda invited Mr. Canis to join, but he claimed he needed to get back to his meditation. Goldilocks and her bears were invited as well, but Goldie seemed nervous around Henry, and she said that they were going to help in the kitchen. Geppetto and Pinocchio, however, happily accepted the invite. "Good evening, all," Pinocchio said. "My father has spoken highly of your family. He considers you some of his dearest friends. I'm quite honored to make your acquaintance." Sabrina couldn't help staring at Pinocchio. If the story was true, Geppetto had carved him from a solid block of wood, but now he was flesh and blood. What threw her the most about the boy wasn't his magical transformation, but how he spoke to everyone. He was so proper and mature, but he looked so young. "Nice to meet you too," Granny Rhoda said. "Your father has told us endless stories about you. He's a very proud papa." "Indeed," Geppetto said, giving the boy a hug. "So, where have you been?" Puck asked the odd little boy. "That's a little rude," Veronica said. Puck let out a tremendous belch. "You think so?" "It's not much of a tale, I'm afraid," the little boy said. "Then skip it," Puck said, piling beans into his mouth. "We spent entirely too much time discussing things other than me." Granny rolled her eyes. "Puck, please, let Pinocchio speak." "Very well. I'm confident Papa told you about our misconnection aboard the grim vessel." "What's a vessel?" Daphne asked. "The layman calls it a boat," Pinocchio explained. "What's a layman?" Daphne asked. "Oh dear, the schools in this town are failing the youth," Pinocchio said. Daphne frowned but said nothing. "I have never cared for the sea after a very disturbing encounter with a great white shark. I also had a bit of trouble on an island off the coast of Italy where children were transformed into donkeys. Thus, I prefer to stay landlocked whenever possible." "I wonder how hard it would be to hide a shark under someone's pillow," Puck whispered to Sabrina. She shook a threatening fist at him. "So I returned to Italy and took a few odd jobs," Pinocchio continued. "I was an apprentice at a newspaper and learned to work a printing press. The paper wasn't much to speak of, mostly propaganda, but it was a valuable trade until I was forced to move on." "Oh dear, what happened?" his father asked. "It's this infernal spell the blue fairy put on me. It made me a real boy, but prevents me from growing any older. To avoid anyone noticing, I had to move on frequently, unable to put down any roots or get ahead in a profession. I made the horrible blunder of sticking around for too long once in Eastern Europe, and the superstitious townspeople chased me with torches and pitchforks. Do yourself a favor and stay away from Transylvania." "Oh, but that's not because of the spell. It's because you are never after. You have to decide to get older, or you'll stay the same age forever." Daphne explained. Alas, no, the boy replied. My condition is unique, even amongst my people. I believe I am trapped at this age due to the wish the blue fairy granted. I asked to be a real boy, not to be a real boy who grows into a man. You have to be real specific with wishes, Sabrina said sympathetically. The blue fairy lives here in town, Daphne said. We could help you find her. Maybe she could fix the wish. Thank you, but no, Pinocchio said. Like your sister said, her wish granting leaves a little to be desired. If I asked her to let me grow up, she'd probably make it so that I grew all the way to the moon. I'll seek other options. It wasn't all bad now, Pine Seed, Geppetto said, continuing the story. He's had quite a life and has gotten to see beautiful parts of the world. He was an artist's assistant in Spain and sold kites in the markets in Paris. He lived in the Taj Mahal for a month before security guards found him, and he was a shoeshine boy on the Orient Express. It sounds like an adventure, Henry said. I guess it could be seen in that manner, Pinocchio said. Papa, I believe I found the magical forest of enchanted wood you used to carve my original body. Marvelous, Geppetto said, clapping his hands. I thought those woods were destroyed by a forest fire. Unfortunately, what you heard is true. Shortly after I discovered it, every tree was consumed by a mysterious blaze. How tragic, his father said. I'd like to know how you ended up here in the camp, Henry pressed. Pinocchio shifted uncomfortably. I had a great deal of savings from my many occupations, so I purchased an airplane ticket on the internet. I landed in New York City and boarded the next train for Fairport Landing. Once I arrived, it was clear that trouble was afoot, but I searched for my father nonetheless. During my inquiries, I met a young man who led me here. He was quite peculiar. He has a pumpkin for a head. Jack Pumpkinhead, Granny said. He's from Oz. They're all a little peculiar. I couldn't be happier, Pine Seed, Geppetto beamed. After dinner, you must show everyone your marionette. Granny smiled. So, you are a puppet maker as well? Like father, like son, Geppetto said, beaming with pride. They hugged again. Sabrina looked over at her own father, who was busy studying his map of the town. It was clear he was looking for another way of Ferryport Landing. Nurse Rat approached the table. She wore a smock with a red cross on the front. She had once worked at the Ferryport Landing Memorial Hospital, where she had been responsible for looking after Red Riding Hood during the height of her mental illness. When she spotted Red among the group, she paused for a moment, then approached. Jacob is going to be fine, she announced. Thank goodness, Granny cried. Normally a wound like his would take a couple of months to heal, but, well, I left him alone for a few minutes, and when I returned, he was smearing a black salve all over his shoulder. Whatever it is, it performs miracles. He should be ship-shape in a couple of days. Relda, if your family has any more of that medicine, it will come in very handy around here. Granny smiled. I'll do my best to find you some. Can we see him? Henry asked. Tomorrow, Nurse Spratt said. He's sleeping now. Thank you so much, Mrs. Spratt, Granny said. You're welcome. She glanced at Red but said nothing, and then she returned to her medical tent. Well, it appears we have even more to celebrate, Geppetto crowed. A loud bell rang, and the gates of the fort opened. Robin Hood and his men marched inside. Leading the hobgoblins, Henry and Veronica had pummeled earlier that day. The brutes were bound at the wrists with heavy chains. They grunted and complained as they were roughly shoved along. Charming appeared and ordered the men to lock all of the creatures in his cabin, and he asked Little John to make sure they were guarded 24 hours a day. We can't have them escape, especially not before we question them. You won't get anything out of us, the hobgoblin leader said. Snow White stepped into the courtyard, still in her military fatigues. She cracked her knuckles loudly. We'll just see about that. Rhoda, you seem to have a knack for gathering useful information. Could you help us know? Charming asked. My mother is not part of your war, Henry said. Granny stood up. Henry, don't be rude. Of course I'll do what I can. Sabrina watched her father seethe. After dinner, the group dispersed. Sabrina and Daphne decided to give their parents some privacy. It was clear another argument was brewing. Puck accompanied them as they wandered aimlessly around the fort, taking in all the different Everafters and the work being done. They stopped when Daphne spotted Red Riding Hood hiding behind Charming's cabin. She rushed over and sat down next to her. Hey, Daphne said. Hey. Red forced a smile onto her face. Are you hiding back here? I'm trying to stay out of the way. I don't want to be any trouble. I'm all about trouble, Puck offered. You're not trouble, Red, Daphne said. Granny invited you to live with us, so that makes you part of our family. You don't have to run off and hide. She turned to Sabrina, clearly hoping she would agree. Instead, Sabrina studied a dusty rock by her foot. She wasn't ready to accept the little girl, not after everything that had happened. She wasn't even ready to pretend. Mrs. Grimm is very kind, Red said. She's gravy, Daphne agreed. Plus, she's an excellent cook. Sabrina laughed out loud and Daphne flashed her an angry look. Well, you shouldn't lie to her, Sabrina said offensively. Daphne turned back to Red. Like I was saying, you're one of us. Soon you will have your own room. Granny promised to build me one too. Maybe you and I could have a secret door that leads between them, one only we know about. I would like that, Red said, grinning. Sabrina was stung. Daphne had refused to share a bedroom with her, but she was hoping her sister would get over her anger. Sabrina knew it had been wrong to lie to Daphne about the Horn of the North Wind, but they were sisters. Wasn't blood thicker than water? Wasn't Daphne supposed to forgive her? Prince Charming's voice boomed from a window directly above them. Sabrina couldn't quite make out what he was shouting. What's going on? Red asked. Let's find out, Sabrina said as she stretched to her tiptoes to peek into the window. The rest of the children followed suit, elbowing each other for the best view. Inside, they saw a hobgoblin sitting on a chair. His hands were bound behind him. His face was both tired and angry. Charming and Snow hovered over him. Granny sat in a chair across from him, her hands resting patiently in her lap. Mr. Canis and Mr. Seven looked on. What does the master know about this camp? Charming demanded. The hobgoblin spat at him. Nothing yet, traitor, but you're a fool if you think you can hide anything from him for long. You speak of the master as if you know him. Who is he? Granny Rhoda asked. That seems to be the end of this video. I'll send more later. Goodbye.